Welcome to part 4 of the Zentangle OCEAN Project. Now at this point there are 3 remaining tangle patterns that I want to introduce to you so that we can use them in our final drawing in this ocean project. Of course, then we'll also move on to the cartoon elements or the non-Zentangle elements as well. But with these 3 remaining tangles, I'm going to break them down and give you step-by-step instructions as I've always done. But let's get started on those last 3 tangles. Now the first of the remaining tangles is called Coral Seeds by Suzanne McNeill. And we're going to use it just for that very purpose to represent some coral plants in our drawing. We're going to start with a seed shape that has a gentle curve to it. And then we're going to lay in some additional seed shapes. They get progressively smaller as they go down. Like that. And then we're going to connect those shapes with a curved line that's bending downward in the middle, going up on the 2 ends, if that makes sense, bending down here, up there. And then we'll make some oral lines that follow that original one and just work their way down between those initial shapes that we created. This will just give the plant some character. Now, as far as shading it, we could do that in several ways depending on what's going on around it and whether we're trying to obey any kind of light sourcing or anything like that. But generally you want to shade around these central stem shapes that are supporting the membranes that we've created. And I'm going to follow kind of a simple light sourcing pattern here in this case, just because it gives me some basis. So I'm assuming that the light is coming kind of centrally located. So it's going to cast a downward shadow and an outward shadow on that central one. So on this piece I'm going to do on both sides. And then this one, just the bottom there, and so on. And we might add a little bit of shading there toward the bottom. And of course, if this were sitting on the seabed like I've indicated, we might see some darkness around that base. That, and we can add a little graphite here. The next pattern we want to look at is called Rayz, R-A-Y-Z, by Sarah Fowler, and it starts with that same type of seed shape that we just used in the previous tangle. Now once we draw that, we're going to make some little curved lines in here to help convey a little bit of a shape. Now starting at the point, we want to make a line coming outward and then coming back. And we're creating a wing for our sea ray, stingray, manta ray, whichever kind of ray you're thinking about. We'll add a couple little details there at the tail or at the point where the stinger might be. I'm going to do an aura line on the inside of the wing. And then I'm going to, in this case, add some additional auras of a curved nature to help give that wing a little sense of shape. And of course, it just adds some additional detail and texture as well. Now, rays in the ocean have all kinds of patterns. Some are just black with white bottoms underneath, if you will. Some have spots. But in our world, we're going to create this fun little guy that looks like this. And you could create these in groups by drawing behind, just like they would swim in the ocean perhaps together. Follow that same general pattern. That we used initially. And of course, what is hidden we don't have to worry about, or what might be behind the other one. Just like that. Let's see, can we squeak one more in here? Of course, these are simplified versions of these creatures. They obviously have faces and heads and other details to their body. And were we drawing a more ultra-realistic type of representational art, we could do that. But this is just a Zentangle method here, and so we're trying to keep it simplified. Now, how can we shade this? Well, let's do a similar type of shading as we did with the coral seed plant. We'll go along that central body piece and add some nice graphite that we can blend outward. And maybe a little bit here on these outer parts of the wings as well, just so we can help get some value differences. Now, if you've nested any critters underneath one another, then you can shade that accordingly by adding some shadow where they overlap. And let's see what this looks like here. Now the final tangle for this particular project is called Indyrella, and this is a Zentangle headquarters tangle, and we're going to use it to represent schools of fish in our drawing, whether they be big or small, but we can do this here. We start with a dot, and we make a little curved line, and then we just continue creating auras of that initial curved line, making them a little wider and longer, and then tapering back down, and we create a fish. Now, if you start about in the middle with your next dot, and again, you're just getting bigger and bigger, And then you're getting smaller and smaller. Again, we'll start about in the middle of this other shape. And that gives us this line here that we can sort of follow as a guide for our sizing as it gets bigger. And then as it gets smaller again. And we can even nestle them in together. And we can continue that pattern until we are content with our school of fish. And don't worry about them all being the same exact size or perfectly symmetrical. A group of fish aren't going to be perfectly symmetrical. They're not going to be swimming along in some sort of Blue Angels format, but they do stick close together. And so we can create this. Now you can also make some that are a little outliers if you want, that maybe curve off a little bit, and that's completely fine. You can add a little variety. Now for shading, this one's very easy. We just pick about the halfway point, and we're going to create a shadow that's on the bottom, if you will, or what we're imagining is the bottom of these little fish. And then once we blend that, you'll see that actually creates a very convincing look of a little school of fish zipping around here on my paper. And so there you have the final 3 patterns that will be used in our Zentangle Ocean project. Thank you so very much for joining along with me today. I hope you enjoyed this process, and I look forward to jumping into the next section in the upcoming video. Thank you again, and have a great day. Bye-bye now.